Yeah. Thanks for coming out, everybody. Same eight faces I see everywhere to all these things. Um, the topic tonight is like celestial navigation, latitude selling, from ancient peoples. I definitely would not use the word primitive people because some of the technology and clever ways they found to navigate are far beyond primitive. So I will start by reading a quote. Anybody read Longitude by Davis Sobel? Oh, love this book. One of the best science writers out there. Before I go too much farther, thanks Rusty Tweed and Kalium and Coconino Community College for having me tonight. And it's a great honor to be here. So I'll start with a quote from Longitude. Dirty weather. Admiral Sir Clodisley Shovel called the fog that had dogged him 12 days at sea. Returning home victorious from Gibraltar after skirmishes with the French Mediterranean forces, Sir Clodisley could not beat the heavy autumn overcast. Fearing the ships might founder on coastal rocks, the admiral summoned all his navigators to put their heads together. The consensus opinion placed the English fleet safely west of Isle du Sault, an island outpost of the Brittany Peninsula. But as the sailors continued north, they discovered to their horror that they had misgauged their longitude near the Scilly Isles. These tiny islands, about 20 miles from the southwest tip of England, point to Land's End like a path of stepping stones. And on that foggy night of October 22nd, 1707, the Scillies became the unmarked tombstone for almost 2,000 of Sir Clodisley's troops. The flagship, the Association, struck first. She sank within minutes, drowning all hands. Before the rest of the vessels could react to the obvious danger, two more ships, the Eagle and the Romney, pricked themselves on the rocks and went down like stones. In all, four of the five warships were lost. So that's a good introduction to the perils. The early days of sailing was difficult, perilous, and pretty sketchy. The early annals of sea voyaging are filled with stories of sinking ships, scurvy, dysentery, and other diseases, and just plain being lost with no land in sight, no clue which direction to go. The captain and navigators no longer sure where they are in comparison to their desired destination. Yet, despite the peril, several groups of people did successfully navigate across vast spaces of open ocean without getting lost, or at least not terribly lost, or at least not every time. How did they accomplish this out in the middle of the ocean where there are no landmarks? The main method they used was something called latitude selling. When latitude selling, a navigator determines what latitude he wants the ship to be on and travels north or south until the ship reaches the desired latitude, and then he attempts to keep his ship on that latitude as best as he can. This method is also referred to as celestial navigation because the ship's navigator very often uses the stars to help them navigate across a realm where there are few, if any, landmarks. So, what is the difference? Let's start by talking what is the difference between latitude and longitude sailing. Probably most of you know, my handy dandy latitude goes around the globe this way, longitude this way. So they didn't have back in the early days of sailing, they hadn't yet developed the technology to determine their longitude. And so it got super sketchy after they lost track of kind of like where they always tried to guess where they would be, and they did try to, make their best guess, and it was called dead reckoning, and they were often dead wrong about that. Um, so then they began to rely on latitude selling. So the way that would work, probably many of you already know, this is my crew drawing. This is kind of the whatever. This is the kind of disc. This is what you would see. Obviously, the world's not a disc. Just kidding. Um, but if you're standing wherever you're at, it looks like a disc. And if you're so the axis is the imaginary axis, and as we all know, the North Star is at the end of that axis, and it doesn't move. So it's very handy if you are out on the ocean, you can on the northern hemisphere, you can rely on the North Star to gauge your latitude. So if you're at the equator, it's basically going to be, if this is the equator, 90 degrees from the equator. And so if you move a degree north, the North Star is going to rise a degree off the horizon. That makes sense, right? If you move 35 degrees, it's going to come up 35 degrees. And if you know that, then you can not guess, you can know where you're at. Now, in the early days, some of the groups I'll be talking about probably may not have known, like, okay, that's 5 degrees, but they did know, like, okay, so now let's get to kind of the next part. So I'll quickly go to longitude selling again, just because it is important.
Excuse me, what is that second word you're saying?
Longitude?
Longitude.
Latitude.
Sailing. Sailing.
Oh yeah, sailing.
Sailing. Okay.
Yeah.
S-A-I.
Sailing. So people in ships sail. This is supposed to be a ship. I drew that. It's really good. That's land. That's an island. It's pretty good.
Saw the palm tree here.
Yeah. Okay, so if you are at the equator, no, probably didn't really need to hold that on. But so for the people on Zoom, here's something I can show you, which is kind of the same as this map, so you can see it a little closer. Okay, so if you're at the equator, 1 degree of longitude at the equator is equal to 60 nautical miles. So being off your longitudinal reading by even a half a degree will result in being off course by many miles. Certainly enough to run aground on a reef you wanted to miss, or miss an island where you needed to stop and restock fresh water, food, or citrus to stave off scurvy. Journals from the early days of seafaring are full of accounts of ships running around on the ground on reefs and rocks. The story I read at the introduction of Admiral Claude Disley's fleet running aground occurred while they were longitude sailing, and they had miscalculated their position. So when sailing north and south, longitude sailing, sailors typically sailed along a coastline that they could see to help keep their bearing until they reached a particular latitude. Early sailors preferred latitude sailing because they had devised very simple yet very clever methods of finding their latitude. Once they reached their desired latitude, they would then do their best to stay on that latitude till they reached their destination. Okay, so first group I'm going to talk about is Indian latitude sailing. By that, I mean the people of India. So they used this, yeah, they used a device called the Kamal. It's very simple, but very effective. This is it. It's just a flat board, and you rest this on the horizon. You put the North Star right there, and then you put this between your teeth, and the closer it is, the higher the star, obviously. So then you just move it out till the horizon's on the bottom, and the North Star is right there. And they had a series of knots, and usually a knot indicated, like this knot might be, this is where our home is. After we leave and we want to find our way back, it's this knot. So if they're sailing across, the navigator's just doing this, not the whole time, but every once in a while he checks his progress. Or if you're the island you want to go to trade, might be a knot way down here. And it's super simple, but very effective. It's called the Kamal. So a little bit more about that. Sailors in Southern Asia use a device called a Kamal to determine their latitude at sea. The Kamal originated with Arab navigators in the 9th century and was used in the Indian Ocean and the Arabian Sea from about the 10th century. It was adopted by Indian navigators soon after its invention in Arabic lands, then adopted by Chinese navigators in the late 15th or 16th or early 16th century. Okay. That I already kind of told you. Okay, so if you had knowledge that the North Star rises or falls depending on your latitude, then, like I said, you can use that to determine your latitude. And then, like they say, when you get on the one you want, you just do your best to try to stay on it. That could get tricky if it gets foggy or rainy. You can't see the horizon or the North Star or whatever for a while. Then you're kind of it's pretty easy to drift off course if once it gets those kind of conditions.
What did they do in the southern hemisphere?
Great question. I will come to that because
You didn't prompt me. I was just curious.
most of this is below the equator, which means obviously that the North Star would not be visible. But that's a good question. I will get to that in a minute. So next, let's talk about Vikings. One of the most impressive things about latitude sailing is that this technique was discovered independently by people and cultures who had no contact with each other. So another group of intrepid open sea sailors were the Vikings. During from the 8th through the 11th centuries, the Vikings were some of the most skilled navigators in the world. Okay. So the best time if you're in the far northern hemisphere where it's cold, best time to sail would be the summertime. But if you're using the North Star in the summertime and you're that far north, what's maybe a problem that you might have?
Yes.
Yeah, long days, it might not even get dark enough to see it, or it might not, by the time it does get dark, you might see it for a couple hours before it gets light again. So the Vikings developed something called a shadowboard, which is this. So it works on the same principle. So the sun hits this little thing. This is called a gnomon. Are my Zoom viewers seeing that? So I'll demonstrate here. So can you see the tip of the shadow? And so obviously I'm doing that so you guys can see, but in the real world, you would have it as flat and level as possible. And then the morning sun just kind of starts hitting it, and it's the same thing. You mark the latitude you want to be on, wherever your destination is, and you try to stay on that. But obviously, the sun comes up low, gets higher, goes low again. So this is what I did today. So here's 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, 4 o'clock. And so if you're sailing along and like say you're a Viking and you're trying to get to the Faroe Islands, you have a specific board for that trip. Or it might be, some of them I've seen are larger. So they'll have a line here, and each one indicates a different latitude that they want to be on. So for instance, if you're trying to get to the Faroe Islands, you will get that particular board at that particular time of year. Because what's the other problem with relying on the sun? It's going to get
elevation. So
elevation of the sun changes day by day. So that's something they have to keep in mind too as they're sailing along. And I haven't read anything about if they switched, like after 5 days or 10 days, they switched to a different board, or if they raised this or lower it. I haven't read anything, but that's the general idea. The other tricky part in a ship that's heaving around is keeping this like level enough, because even just moving it a little, like like that seems level to me, but I'm off by quite a bit. So one of the methods they think they did was to put it in like a large dish or a bucket with water to kind of so it would float level. And they would probably they figure people probably had to kind of hold the bowl because even if you just have that on the ship, it's still like tossing around.
Right.
Yeah, so they probably had some people holding it and then navigate, and then even then, so you got this in a bowl or a bucket in the water, and then it starts like rolling around, but you need to keep it east, west, north, south. So sloshing around, the navigator's probably lightly touching it with his fingers, moving it. Okay, okay. And then, okay, if you're, some of you may know this, if you're a Viking or anyone at sea or in the woods and you don't have a compass, how can you find north? Anybody know that?
Moss on the side of the tree.
Yep. If you're a Viking out in the middle of the ocean. So the best way is take a little reading when the sun is like right here. Whoops, laser. Make a mark where the tip is. Wait anywhere from like 15 minutes to a half hour, and it moves again. Mark where that tip of that is. Make a line between those two tips, and that is east-west. Then just bisect it, and you got north-south. So that's
So-
one of the things.
Quick question, so
Yeah.
like the Mayflower going to America, okay, in England, so they knew what latitude that, whatever point they want to hit in Americas, what that was, and so that they're just going on that mark, right? I assume.
Not 100% sure. I would guess so. I don't know if they had it planned out to hit a specific latitude mark or if they're just kind of like general, aiming for the general
They were on,
continent.
obviously, when all the different fleets, they kept going back and forth with goods, so I'm sure they had somebody had an idea how to do it, so.
Yeah, for sure. So I read this. I've only read one account of it. I haven't really double verified it, but one of the things I read is when Columbus set sail, he was aiming for a specific port in India,
Right.
and he knew the latitude of that. And so after he left, he got on that latitude, but then of course bumped into America and stuff. So they knew it. Yeah, close. Maybe my biggest pet peeve is that they discovered America and they're like, oh, it's the Indians. And they just never changed it. I'm like,
Yeah.
that bugs me so much. I don't know. But here's kind of a picture of like a different variety of this. And you can see that one has three different, they're called gnomon lines. So that one's for three different latitudes that you want to sail on. Okay, another tricky thing, especially in the North Atlantic, gets foggy for long periods of time. And if you're needing the sun to light up your sun shadowboard, that can be a problem. So they came up with a clever solution. It didn't help them find their latitude, but what it did was at least kept them traveling east and west on that, at least so they're not like wandering. It's cloudy and pretty soon they're wandering and they're actually rowing north or south or some crazy thing. So this is called a Viking sunstone. It's actually Icelandic spar. And the way that works is you, on a cloudy day, hold this up to the sun, and the sun will be behind the clouds. So you just hold it up to the brightest spot, and the light will come through. And there's a term when a single light comes through, but when it hits this particular kind of rock, it splits into two light beams. And so you can move it till basically you're looking at the two light beams become parallel to the light source. I'll help demonstrate that. Try to do it without blinding you guys. Switch to laser mode. Laser. Can you guys see two beams?
Yes.
I'll try to do it without it like going right in your eyes. So one beam goes through. Here's for the people at Zoom. One beam hits that, splits to two beams. And then if you're the navigator looking at the sun, then you're like, where? Oh, there it is. And as soon as those two lines go to the sun, you're like, okay, that is kind of south. Even then, you still got to be like, wait for it to get all the way north. But you can at least kind of keep a better guess.
They got it wrong, they walked the plank, huh?
They blocked the play. They got it wrong. They would run into a reef or something. Yeah, we get all backed up. Okay, so let's do a little example of Viking sailing. Shetland Island in Sweden lies at around 60 degrees latitude. The Faroe Islands, west of Shetland, not very far, are at around 61 degrees north. So when your longboat leaves Shetland, first go north till you're at 61 degrees, then turn west and try to stay on that and until you run into the Faroe Islands. But the Faroe Islands are not very big. They would be easy to miss, especially if it's foggy or dark. My guess, it wouldn't surprise me if the Vikings discovered Iceland on accident, trying to get to the Faroe Islands, and then just kept going. Can you imagine being a navigator on a Viking ship? Everybody's probably like, it's behind us. No, it's in front of us. Probably want to like cut your head off. That'd be a terrible job. And my guess is I don't know. I haven't, I just kept going and like, whoa, what's this place? But they eventually got pretty good at it. So Icelandic spar is made of crystallized calcium carbonate. The principle that we saw is called birefringence. The amount of light that passes through the crystal depends on the polarity of the light, and due to its natural form, it splits a single light into two lights, and then you can determine where the sun is. So Viking navigators used the piece of Iceland spar on heavily overcast days when the sun wasn't directly visible. I already said the rest of this. Sailing while lost at sea was common enough for Norse sailors that they had a name for it. It was called Hafvila, which means lost on a vast expanse of sea. Yeah.
Sums it up.
So I just right here, can you imagine being on the very first voyage? Like you're in Sweden and someone's like, let's go across, let's go see how far we can go. And you're like, I don't know. And some guy's got an idea, like, I think I can kind of figure it out. Let's just go see what we find. That's crazy. Like the first time anybody does that. What might be even crazier is like the second or third time or fourth time after they did get lost. And they're like, remember how we got lost? I think it's gonna work better this time. Who wants to go with me? And they just like raw dogged it and figured it out. And I love that how all these different cultures that don't have any connection with each other finally figured it out. Okay. Now, going to the same, works on the same principle. Probably most of you have heard of a sextant, maybe even seen a sextant. I ordered a sextant that didn't arrive. That would have been fun to use. But here's basically a sextant. Let us zoom viewers. So it works on the same principle. It's for latitude sailing, it's to fix your latitude. This was invented much later. But when you're holding it, this is your eye, you look through the telescope to the horizon. And it's kind of, the eyepiece is split in two. This mirror right here is, there's a name for it, but it reflects, but you can also see through it. It's like a half-coated mirror. So then this goes up to another mirror, the index mirror, and then you use that mirror to find the sun. And after you find the sun, then you move this arm. And when you're looking through the telescope, it looks like the sun moves down to the horizon. And so when you move it down till the sun is resting on the horizon, and then this bar right here is made of brass and it has all the degrees, like way more precise than just like 61 degrees. It's probably has quarters and eighths and all that stuff too. I really wish my sextant would have, but it did not. I'll tell you a little bit more about the sextant and its history.
Somebody have one? You have one? correct?
No.
Oh.
I was saying I'd like to see an astronaut.
Oh,
I'm getting to that part too. I won't cover that as much. A sextant is quite a bit more sophisticated than a board on a string, board and a string, but it uses the same principles of measuring how high the North Star is above the northern horizon. But using a sextant instead of a Kamal, the results are more precise. The sextant was invented in the early 1730s by John Hadley of England and by Thomas Godfrey of America, independent of each other. Anyway, it's interesting. I kind of told you how it works. Okay, told you all that. Okay, and again, we get to the hazards of, due to variables of weather and other circumstances, the horizon is not always visible. Could be low-lying clouds, an iceberg, an island, and other ships just in your way. But one thing that is consistent when you're out at sea, the horizon is always just there. So a later thing they added to a sextant was an artificial horizon. So like it's not always there, but it's always there, which is cool. So I'm gonna take us on a little aside to our local history. Let's talk about John Wesley Powell just a second. So sextants, chronometers, barometers, compasses were used on land as well. The Lewis and Clark expedition carried these tools with them to chart their latitude and longitude, direction of travel, and their elevation. That's what the barometers were for. So a quick aside to John Wesley Powell and his first expedition through the Grand Canyon in 1869 too. The idea was, of course, to map it. So he brought sextants, he brought 4 chronometers, barometers, and compasses. But as many of us know, in Disaster Falls, when they lost their first boat way up there, it was like first week of the trip. It was carrying all 4 chronometers. So you need a chronometer to know your longitude. So very bad. So to just touch on it real briefly, to know your longitude, you need to know the precise time where you're at and the precise time of some other place. They usually use Greenwich. And then if you know the precise time of Greenwich and your precise time, you can know your longitude. So Powell loses all 4 chronometers, but he still had his pocket watch. It wasn't as accurate as the chronometers at keeping time, but with the sextant, you can reset it every day. So with the sextant, you can tell when the sun is exactly overhead, and if your watch is running a little fast or a little slow, move it back to noon, and then you can redetermine your. So Probably many of us know his expedition reached the Little Colorado River on August 10th, and they stayed there until August 13th. By that point in the journey, they had suffered many catastrophes and lost most of their food. At this point in the trip, they were down to 1/6 rations. The rational thing to do would just be just keep going, keep making miles, get out of there, finish the trip. But the whole point of this journey was to create a map of the Grand Canyon River corridor, and fixing the latitude and longitude of prominent locations, such as the junction of the LCR and Grand Canyon, would help a lot. The reason they stayed there so long for 4 days was because it was cloudy and Powell wasn't able to see the stars and take a latitude reading. He was finally able to do that on August 12th. He left the LCR the next morning. Just a few days later, now they're into the Grand Canyon and they're down into the meat of the big rapids. There's no way to portage them. Everybody here been on a Grand Canyon river trip? Okay. So they're down there with Sock Dowager and Grapevine, named by Powell. And the crew, they got really beat up. Harrowing runs in those, damaged their boats, broke some oars. They kind of limped their fleet into Bright Angel Creek to rest a bit, repair boats and oars. And it was during the time at Bright Angel Creek that Powell lit into Dunn, who had lost. Dunn was the one who had lost Powell's pocket watch, even though it was 2 weeks earlier. I think the nerves of it all was just finally getting to him. And the reason Powell was so upset that he had lost his last pocket watch would be now they can't find their longitude. And if you're making a map, that helps a lot to be able to put down your longitude. Okay. So, for those of you who read Longitude, beautiful book, explains how it's crazy, right? Crazy story of how they invented that. So it basically comes down to a reliable chronometer that will keep time and won't run fast or slow. Okay, I'm going to get to this. More hazards and troubles of not knowing your longitude. A reliable marine chronometer was invented by English horologist John Harrison with his successful H4 model in 1759, which was compact, accurate timepiece that finally solved the longitude problem for sailors by keeping precise time at sea. This revolutionized navigation. So I'm going to read another passage from Longitude. Yeah. Which kind of, again, talks of the importance of knowing where you are at sea, which is not always easy. Beyond its potential for human suffering, the global ignorance of longitude wreaked economic havoc in the grandest scale. It confined ocean-going vessels to a few narrow shipping lanes that promised safe passage. Forced to navigate by latitude alone, whaling ships, merchant ships, warships, and pirate ships all clustered along well-trafficked routes where they fell prey to one another. In 1592, for example, a squadron of 6 English men of war coasted off the Azores, lying in ambush for Spanish traders heading back from the Caribbean. The Madre de Dios, an enormous Portuguese galleon returning from India, sailed into their web. Despite her 32 brass guns, the Madre de Dios lost the brief battle, and Portugal lost a princely cargo. So I'm going to skip up to... So this is another problem with longitude, latitude, even with latitude. If you know your latitude, if you don't know your longitude, there can be other problems here. Okay. This is Commodore George Anson. So Anson's squadron took the Atlantic the old-fashioned way on the strength of latitude readings, dead reckoning, and good seamanship. The fleet reached Patagonia intact after an unusually long crossing, but then a grand tragedy unfolded, founded on the loss of their longitude at sea. On March 7th, 1741, with the holds already stinking of scurvy, Anson sailed the Centurion through the Straits of Le Maire from the Atlantic into the Pacific Ocean. As he rounded the tip of Cape Horn, a storm blew up from the west. It shredded the sails and pitched the ship so violently that men who lost their holds were dashed to death. The storm abated from time to time only to regather its strength and plunge the Centurion for 58 days without mercy. The winds carried rain, sleet, and snow, and scurvy all the while whittled away at the crew, killing 6 to 10 men every day. Anson held west against this onslaught, more or less along the parallel at 60 degrees south latitude, until he figured he had gone a full 200 miles westward beyond Tierra del Fuego. The other 5 ships of his squadron had been separated from the Centurion in the storm, and some of them were lost forever. According to the ship's log, on May 24th, 1741, Anson at last delivered the Centurion to the latitude of Juan Fernandez Island at 35 degrees south. All that remained to do was run down the parallel to make harbor. But which way to go? The island lied to the east or the west of the Centurion's present position. That was anybody's guess. Anson guessed west, and so headed in that direction. 4 more desperate days at sea, however, stripped him of the courage of his conviction, and he turned the ship around. 48 hours after the Centurion began beating east along the 35th parallel, land was sighted. But it showed itself to be the impermeable Spanish-ruled mountain-walled coast of Chile. This jolt required a 180-degree change in direction, and in Anson's thinking, he was forced to confess that he had probably been within hours of Juan Fernandez Island when he abandoned his trip west for the east. Once again, the ship had to turn around and retrace her steps. Oh my God.
Right?
Yeah, really. Yeah. Which brings us to the next part. So as you guys notice, Commodore George Anson was latitude sailing at 60 degrees south latitude, which brings up the obvious question: how did navigators determine their latitude in the southern hemisphere? That brings us to the astrolabe, simply one of the most amazing, most ingenious inventions ever made. So I won't get into the astrolabe too much. That's a whole other Comet talk, which would be fascinating to dive into sometime. But I'll give you a little taste. Measuring, so the astrolabe could be used for measuring the sun's highest point, solar noon, above the horizon. You can use that with an astrolabe or a quadrant, or later a sextant. But in the early days, it was an astrolabe. You could also use the Southern Cross and pointers. Using these constellation navigators found a southwards. The Southern Cross was different than the North Star. It was down there, but it kind of wobbled around. It wasn't always in the same spot. But if you knew what to do, if you knew how to use your astrolabe, you could figure out your latitude. Okay, invention. The earliest versions of the astrolabe are believed to have been created in ancient Greece around 150 BCE. Greek astronomer Hipparchus is often credited with inventing the plain astrolabe around 150 BCE. Advancement and spread. The instrument was further developed and perfected in the Islamic world starting as early as the 18th century CE and was introduced to Europe through Spain in the 12th century. I kind of have a picture of one. This is not the best, but it's a disc on a disc on a disc. This inner disc represents where you are. And then these little things, there's this wheel that is permanent. And all these little things are pointers. And then this can be turned, that can be turned. And if you know what you're doing, you can figure out, like they used it for everything. Like the Islamic people used it to find Mecca when they were far away, like right that way. So that mostly, I will wrap up with a few things. Anybody got questions so far about how that works?
You know, it's interesting, Dominguez and Escalante probably knew their latitude when they were passing through this country.
I bet he did. Do you know, did he have that, like,
I think
Any of those kind
I
of
think
things?
they used a staff. which has essentially the same, you have to have one person calculate the latitude at all times and do exactly the same thing. You have to hold it exactly the same
Right.
distance. And then you have to know what little mark on your staff you're estimating your latitude by.
Yeah.
But I think they were actually pretty good, you
Yeah.
know, for the time.
Yeah. It would be the same with
Not to,
one of these, like me giving this to you or you,
Yeah.
because your arm length's different. Everybody would have to have their own. So I'll finish with, so since we're talking about the stars and sailing and wind and all that, I will finish up with a little night sky, etc., intern. A lot of terms we use every day have their origins in the sky. For instance, most of the days of the week take their names from celestial objects. You probably already know some of this. Sunday is named for the sun, named after Suna, Sunna, the Germanic goddess of the sun. Monday is named for the moon, namely Mani, Germanic god of the moon. Tuesday is named for the Nordic god Tyr, Tyr, which is the Nordic god of war, the equivalent of the Roman god Mars and the Greek god Ares. Wednesday is named for the planet Mercury. It derives its name from the Saxon god Woden, the wanderer. Woden is the same person as the Roman god Mercury, equivalent, I should say. Thursday is named for the planet Jupiter, derives its name from Thor, the Germanic and pagan and Norse god for Jupiter. Friday is named for the planet Venus, derives its name from Frige, Frige, the Anglo-Saxon god of love. Love, baby. Frige is the same person as the Roman god Venus. Saturday is named for the planet Saturn, derives its name from the Roman god of agriculture, Saturn. Month names. January is named for Janus, the Roman god of the doorway, which comes from the Latin word for door, which is Ianua, Ianua, since January is the doorway to the new year. February is named after the Latin word februum, which means purification, via the ancient purification ritual of Februa, which was held during February's full moon. Interesting side note, I think, January and February were the last 2 months to be added to the Roman calendar, since the Romans originally considered winter to be a monthless period. January and February were added to the calendar in 713 BC by Numa Pompilius. March, named after the Roman god Mars, the Greek Ares, the god of war. It was thus named because March was the beginning of the military campaign season. March was originally the first month of the Roman calendar. April comes from the Latin word aperire. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Aperire, which means to open, referring to the time of year when flowers and leaves of trees first open. May is named for the Greek goddess Maya, Maia, a goddess of fertility, whose festival was held during May full moon. June is named for the Roman goddess Juno, the wife of Jupiter. July was originally called Quintilius because it was the fifth month of the Roman year. Was renamed Caesar was renamed to July for Julius Caesar in 44 BC because it was the month of his birth. August was originally named Sextilis because it was the 6th month of the Roman year. Was renamed to August to honor Caesar Augustus. September, thus named because the 7th month of the year under the old Roman calendar. October, thus named because it was the 8th month of the year under the old Roman calendar. November because it was the 9th. December because it was the 10th. Here's some random calendar related facts. The Julian calendar is a reform of the Roman calendar introduced by Julius Caesar in 46 BC. It did not include a leap day, so the calendar moved off a day every 4 years in its alignment with the tropical calendar. Today we use the Gregorian calendar, which was adopted in 1582 by Pope Gregory XIII. The main difference being that the Gregorian calendar includes a leap day every 4 years to keep the calendar in time with the tropical calendar. Many ancient cultures, probably most ancient hunter-gatherer cultures, followed a lunar calendar, as there are 13 moons in a year, 13 full moons in a year, with each month being 28 days. 13 times 28 equals 364, leaving one day remaining at the end of the year. Some cultures treated this extra day as a dark day, some as a festival day, some just as an extra day. So how did we move from that, which makes way more sense to me, to the modern 12-month calendar? It was the ancient Babylonians. The Babylonians created the zodiac about 2,500 years ago. There are 12 zodiacs. The Babylonians invented the zodiac signs to divine omens, believing that the movements of the stars and planets reflected divine will and predicted earthly events. They wanted the signs of the zodiac to appear in the heavens, so they divided up the heavens into 12 sections. They said quadrants, but that doesn't make sense. And found stars in that vicinity that could represent the zodiac. That's why none of the zodiacs actually look like what they represent. Like, how are those supposed to be twins? It's just like random clusters. This system was later adopted and modified by the ancient Greeks and Romans, and a corresponding 12-month calendar was also adopted to coincide with it. Since we're talking about ships, let's talk about the names of the winds. Anybody know what the name of the west wind is? The Zephyr. Probably heard of that at least. But probably most of the rest of these you have. Many of us are familiar with the Greek word for the west wind, which is zephyr or zephyrus. But here's the rest. The north wind is boreas. The north-northeast wind is meses. The northeast wind is hyakus. The east wind is apeliotes. Southeast wind is eurus. South wind is nodus. Southwest is lips. West is zephyrus. Northwest is argestis. North-northwest is Thracius. And here's one little weird fact I'll finish on. Etymology of the word orient. When one is determining their position in the world, this is known as orienteering, getting oriented, or orientation. This is because in medieval Europe, maps placed east at the top of their maps instead of north. So the word orient comes from the Latin word oriens, meaning east or rising, because it was associated with the sunrise. This is why European countries refer to Asian nations, and really any countries east of them, as the Orient. That's all I got. Thanks for coming to my Comet talk. Any questions?
I just have a comment about
Okay.
when you were talking about getting lost. The book Icebound, have you read that? By Andrea Pitzer. It's about the Dutch who had to, they were trying to find a northeast passage. And they had to spend a year in the ice and lived in a hut. And it's a really good book. But again, they didn't know how far. They had no idea what they're allowed to do. Yeah.
Rusty, anything online?
I have not seen anything pop up online yet, but I'll throw a question out there while we're waiting to see. Stephen, I'm wondering if in some of your research for this topic you came across anyone who noted like a rapid period of exploration, like if it ramped up once some of these problems were solved with the chronometer, and also like recognizing that citrus prevented scurvy, which seemed like maybe they happened close to around the same time. So I'm just wondering if you saw anything suggesting that things kind of got pretty crazy in terms of exploration.
Yeah, I mean, really kind of Columbus kind of got it started. Once they discovered the New World, then everybody was out for the riches of the New World. And I would say that was kind of the first phase of it. And even then, most of that was still latitude sailing. So, yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
But really, once the longitude thing got figured out, that worked a lot because people could just be braver and take new routes and invent new routes.
Yeah.
Well,
One other thing I was going to throw out there too, I know there's a ton of books on shipwrecks and stuff like that. It's a great topic, but there's a new book a few years ago it came out called The Wager, which documents Anson's expedition, but from the perspective of some of the folks that were on The Wager, which was one of the boats that wrecked right around the Cape there. It's an interesting story. So anyway, thank you for the talk. That was fantastic. I'm looking at Zoom, and there is a question here. What was the name of the item the Vikings used with the two lights?
oh, it's Icelandic spar.
Icelandic spar. Thank you.
Yep. You can get it from Amazon. It's very good.
Tomorrow.